All right, let's dive into a story from history that has a surprisingly, and frankly, pretty scary modern legacy. We're going back to London, 1952, to a disaster that didn't come from some big explosion or accident, but from something as simple as every day as people just trying to stay warm.
This quote it absolutely nails the horror of the Great Smog. You see, this wasn't some outside threat. It was the city's own weather, its famous fog, that turned into one of its most brutal killers. So how on earth did that happen? Well, this wasn't just any old fog. What happened in London was a perfect storm, a kind of conspiracy between human activity and nature that literally trapped an entire city inside a toxic bubble. It was a frighteningly simple recipe for disaster. Okay, so first you have London burning tons and tons of cheap, really dirty coal. Second, a weather system just parks itself right over the city, so there's no wind, nothing's moving. And third, a layer of warmer air up high acts like a giant lid, trapping all that cold, polluted air right down at street level. Now, this is what made it so incredibly deadly. The fog itself became a chemical factory in the sky. All that sulfur dioxide pouring out of millions of chimneys, it mixed with the water droplets in the air, and it transformed into tiny particles of sulfuric acid. Think about that. People weren't just breathing smoke, they were breathing acid. So the city was completely blinded. It just ground to a halt. But the true horror story, the real killer, was unfolding much more quietly. In people's homes, on the streets, and in hospitals that were just completely overwhelmed.
I mean, just imagine not being able to see your own feet. Public transport, gone. Ambulances, the very thing you need to save people, couldn't even find their way through the streets. Hospitals were absolutely flooded. And doctors doing autopsies found that victims' lungs were literally blackened and clogged by the very air they had been breathing.
In the days right after the smog lifted, officials started looking at the data, and they estimated that about 4,000 more people had died than what was normal for that time of year. A truly shocking number. But you know what? It was just the beginning. Later on, when scientists could do a much deeper analysis, the true toll came into focus. The number of what they call excess deaths was actually closer to 12,000 people. A catastrophic loss of life that was, at first, tragically underestimated. And here's where it gets really interesting. The government's initial story to the public was, oh, it's just a bad flu season. But that official excuse completely collided with a brutal reality. You see, doctors and coroners were seeing something else entirely. Heart failure from a lack of oxygen and chemical inflammation of the lungs. They knew this wasn't the flu. It was the air itself. A tragedy on this scale, I mean, you just can't sweep it under the rug. It completely overwhelmed the political reluctance to act and forced a reckoning that would change public policy forever, not just in Britain, but really for the whole world. It was the doctors, the scientists, the statisticians. They really became the heroes of this story. They used data, autopsy reports, hospital records. They used all of it as weapons to cut through the denial and prove, without a shadow of a doubt, that the smog was the killer.
And you can see the impact right here. It's just a clear, direct line. The disaster happens at the end of 1952. The very next year, investigations kick off. And boom, just 4 years later, you get one of the most important pieces of environmental law in modern history.
And the Clean Air Act was a really smart, comprehensive attack on the problem. It created special zones where you just couldn't burn dirty fuels. It pushed everyone to shift to cleaner energy at home. And it forced industry to move power plants out of the cities and build much taller smokestacks to spread out whatever pollution was left. But you know, the smog's biggest legacy wasn't just a new law. It fundamentally changed how we think about risk, how we use science, and what we expect our governments to do to protect our health.
This disaster was the event that really put this powerful tool on the map. Excess death analysis gave scientists a way to finally see the invisible killer. And in doing that, it helped create the entire field of modern environmental epidemiology, which is just the science of how our environment affects our health.
And this right here, this was a complete game changer in how we think. Before, you might have had to prove that one specific smokestack killed one specific person, which is nearly impossible. After 1952, just showing a clear risk to the whole population was enough to justify government action. That idea is now the bedrock of modern public health.
The Great Smog taught us a really terrifying lesson, that catastrophes don't always come from some single dramatic failure. There was no villain. Sometimes they come from the completely normal, everyday operation of our world when ordinary systems just get pushed a little bit beyond their breaking point.
And that powerful lesson
learned in the cold, dark streets of 1952 London is, believe me, more relevant today than ever before.
Ultimately, this disaster completely transformed our idea of what air even is. It was no longer just a nice-to-have like a local park. It became a basic human right, and protecting it became a core responsibility of government.
And just look at this comparison. It's staggering. The 12,000 deaths in London were a horrifying wake-up call. But the global system for tracking air quality that it helped create now shows us a problem on an almost unimaginable scale. Millions of people dying prematurely every single year from the air we all breathe.
And this is the really chilling echo from the past. When scientists analyze the smog in today's megacities, they find that even though the sources are different, more cars, less coal, the toxic effect on the human body is remarkably similar to what those doctors were seeing in London over 70 years ago.
So yeah, London's deadly smog did eventually lead to cleaner skies for its people. But it leaves us with this massive, critical question. As cities all over the world face their own air quality crises, have we really absorbed the hard-won lesson from that tragic winter? Are we listening?